Hey, good afternoon. My name is Ted Grueser. I'm the missions director at Grueser for Clarke, and I'm so glad to be with you this afternoon, especially in this crazy time that we're living in right now. I'm going to read to you this afternoon from Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. It's the story of the healing of the paralytic. Jesus went back again to Capernaum, where after a few days words got around that he was at home. A crowd gathered, so that people couldn't even get near the door as he was telling them the message. A party arrived, 4 people carrying a paralyzed man, bringing him to Jesus. They couldn't get through to him because of the crowd, so they opened up the roof above where he was. When they had dug through it, they used ropes to let down the stretcher the paralyzed man was lying on. Jesus saw their faith and said to the paralyzed man, "Child, your sins are forgiven." "How dare the fellow speak like this?" grumbled some of the legal experts to themselves. "It's blasphemy. Who can forgive sins except God?" Jesus knew at once, in his spirit, that thoughts like this were in the air. "Why do your hearts tell you to think that?" he asked. "Answer me this," he went on. "Is it easier to say to this cripple, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, pick up your stretcher, and walk'? You want to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins?" He turned to the paralytic. "I tell you," he said, "get up, take your stretcher, and go home." He got up, picked up the stretcher in a flash, and went out before them all. Here ends the reading. Most people don't even realize that this was probably Jesus' own home. He had moved to Capernaum from Nazareth. At that point, he was returning from short trips around the neighboring villages. He found crowds pressing around the door as though he were a movie star or a well-known football player. Jesus himself was the unlucky household owner who had his roof ruined that day. This opens up quite a bit of new possibilities for understanding what Jesus said to the paralyzed man. How would you feel if someone made a big hole in your roof? But Jesus looks down and says, with a rueful smile, "All right, I forgive you." Something in his voice, though, made them all realize this was different. This forgiveness went deeper than mere domestic disputes. Jesus was speaking with a quiet authority, which went down into the paralyzed man's innermost being. Not surprisingly, those around felt uneasy. Only the priest could declare forgiveness, speaking in the name of God. If that's what the man needed, his friends should have taken him to the temple in Jerusalem, not to a wandering preacher. Mark's way of telling the tale makes it a signpost. It points on through the twists and turns of the gospel story to Jesus' trial before Caiaphas in chapter 14. The story is a tiny version of the whole gospel. Jesus teaching and healing. Jesus condemned for blasphemy. Jesus vindicated. The paralyzed man's healing point forward to the new life that Jesus himself will have in the resurrection and will share with everyone who wants it. The key sentences, then, is the one in verse 10. The Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. The Son of Man, in Jesus' language, could simply mean I, or someone like me. But taking the Son of Man in Mark as a whole, Daniel 7 provides the clue to the deeper meaning. There, one, like a Son of Man, is a representative of God's true people. He is opposed by the forces of evil, but God vindicated him, rescued him, proved him to be in the right, and given him authority. In Daniel, this authority enables him to dispense God's judgment. Here, in a fascinating twist, he has authority to dispense God's forgiveness. the same point forward to Jesus' answer to Caiaphas, 1462. In many cultures today, forgiveness is seen as a sign of weakness. Revenge for them is a moral duty. Sometimes whole families, whole communities are torn apart by this. Sometimes whole nations and governments engage in childish but deadly tit-for-tat retaliations. People who live that way tend to think that God lives that way too. We shouldn't be surprised, though, then that Jesus' unexpected declaration of forgiveness sent shockwaves running through the house, through the village, through the nations, and finally through the world. It wasn't simply that he's committing a theological crime. The hole in his own roof was nothing compared with the hole he was tearing through the entire way of life. Forgiveness is the most powerful thing in the world. But because it is so costly, we prefer to settle for second best. Jesus, already on his way to paying the full price, offered nothing less than the best. Jesus' people have to be for the world what he was for Israel. We have to find ways of bringing healing and forgiveness to our communities. It can be done. Think of the Truth and Reconciliation, the Commission in South Africa. But it is enormously costly. People will oppose it. But the new life that comes as a result is enough vindication, enough proof that the living God is at work. Forgiveness can also, of course, change individuals. It can, as in this case. So down to the hidden roots of the personality, gentle healing, old, long bruised hurts. Often people think healing and forgiveness is impossible. They find God distant or uncaring. But true faith won't be satisfied with that. This story is a picture of prayer. Don't stay on the edge of the crowd. Dig through God's roof and find yourself in his presence. You will get more than you bargained for. It's not pleasant if you're helpless, on a stretcher, but you don't have many responsibilities. Once you've met the living, forgiving God in Jesus, you'll find yourself on your feet, going out into the world in the power of God's love.